Welcome to the Tough Fish Show. I am so excited to bring to you Meredith Schorr. Meredith, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am so glad you are here, and I would love for you to start with how did you get into writing?
Okay, well, you know how you hear about a lot of authors who like grew up at like 3 years old writing their first book and walking around with pencils and stuff like that. That was not me. I did not realize that I wanted to be a writer until like my 30s. After college, I got certified in paralegal studies and I got a job right away. I think my biggest fear was just not being able to pay my rent, not being able to pay off credit cards. So I like just wanted a job that paid well. And so it wasn't a passion. I enjoyed it, but and I still have it. So if my boss is watching, I still enjoy my job, but it was never my passion. And my boss at the time, who was also a really close friend, started complimenting my technical writing skills. And he would have me edit lawyers' briefs and things like that. And so as soon as somebody tells me that I'm good at something, it's like a really good incentive. It makes me want to do it more. And so I started like writing everything from Yelp reviews for bars and restaurants and book reviews on Amazon and little poems that I would have people use for invitations or just little things that they were doing. And then I started blogging. And I don't know if you remember, but in like the early to mid aughts, blogging was huge. And I had like an anonymous dating blog where I would talk about being single in my 30s in Manhattan and what it was like. And I got a following. And it was very, very exciting. And so I eventually segued writing nonfiction or to fiction because I was walking to work one day and I was daydreaming about a relationship that I had that hadn't gone well. And in my mind, I was keeping myself busy in my mind, like kind of like writing an alternate ending in my head about how things could have been better. And I decided to just combine the technical skills, my writing, my imagination, and my love of romance. And I just combined them all. And I started writing my first romance that day. And I never looked back.
Okay, I love all of that. And you've hit on a few different things that I think are so cool. First off, the fact that your background with the paralegal background, I bet that also helps when you're reading like a contract from an agent or a contract from a publisher to have some familiarity or know where to ask questions or what to understand better versus a deer in the headlights feeling of how do I break this down and really understand what this contract is. So your background lends itself nicely into that, just having a familiarity with it. But to your point, the technical writing that you were doing also, yes, it's a different type of writing than fiction, but yet it's still, you baby stepped your way into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I love that because like the blog was a way for you to test out a little bit more. It's sort of technical, it's sort of not in this sense
Mm-hmm.
because it was a little bit of a segue but it was allowing more of that, to your point, your imagination, your creativity, and then stepping your toes into the fiction story. I mean, I love that. I love that so much.
Yeah, the blogging helped me find my voice, and the day job helped me have all the grammar and the sentence structure already down because I know a lot of writers struggle with that. It's not just figuring out how to like write a book on a developmental standpoint, but getting the line editing and the copy editing. And I think that believe me, I still have trouble with the commas and don't even ask me how to use a semicolon. Thank goodness for for my copy editors. But the basic sentence structure I had down.
Yeah, yeah. And so when you're pursuing this first book, you're pursuing writing this alternate ending, writing this story. It sounds like it was a form of characters coming together and a plot sort of coming together. So did you almost start with the end in mind and write that first and then kind of, basically reverse engineer or back into how it starts and getting the story moving to end up that way? Or how did that come together?
I did start at the beginning, but I had an ending in mind. And what's interesting is that as I was writing the book, I realized that my character had no chemistry with her leading man, which was very telling because my relationship was meant to end.
Mhm.
And I was not meant to end up with that man. And neither was my character, because I think, like a lot of authors' first books, the character is inspired by them. I mean, my character wasn't me, but she was kind of me. And she did not belong with the love interest that I had set out for her. And it was going to be a love triangle. And I ended up switching who she ended up with.
Okay, so then how did you feel that it was flat, if you will, or the chemistry wasn't there from the get-go, or was it you're writing midway through and realizing they should be getting together at this point, and my character is sitting there looking at me like, really? How could you do this to me? We don't want to do this.
It actually was my sister. When I started writing this book, I also was taking a class at the Gotham Writers Workshop in Manhattan. I think they still have classes, although I like taking classes in person much better than virtual. I just learn better and I like to meet people. But so they would critique the pages, but they hadn't gotten that far. So I did not have many members of the writing community like I have now. I have a community. I have beta readers and critique partners and just people to bounce things off of. When I first started, I had my sister. I would send her 25 pages at a time and she would critique them. And she is actually the person who told me, Stephanie and Craig do not belong together. Like, how could you not see that Ryan and her are adorable together? They're perfect together. And I had to kind of read it again from a much more objective standpoint and realize that she was right.
Oh, wow. That is cool though. And that's what you just shared about having somebody else where you feel comfortable enough to share your work and be vulnerable with, and then receive the feedback. Because you when you're writing that story and it is you and the page and it's coming together, you are getting it to a point, but then it gets to some phase and you go, okay, I know if I really want to publish this, more people are going to be reading it. So where can I start? And maybe it's with a developmental editor if you feel like your story needs more. Mm-hmm. But starting with the beta readers even is better, because you're going to get really good feedback that will help you strengthen your story, which you may or may not need a developmental editor. But then if you do, it will be a much better story for them to work with. Mm-hmm. But what sounds like what your sister did was just help to, give you that space to be that safe space and say, hey, I can give you this, and I'm coming from a loving place. And I think that whomever you ask, you want to trust, especially in those initial phases, you want to trust that their intention is to build you up and to help you have a great result, not to tear it down. It should be constructive, but it shouldn't be it shouldn't be, ugly or feel demoralizing in what you're doing, because you've created something. This is a big deal.
Yeah, I think there's a fine line when you ask people to read your work, especially if it's a third party who has no relation to you either. I still think kindness is very important. But when you're going, I don't want to send it to somebody who says it's perfect, 10/10, no notes, because that's not helpful. Because I know that I do not write a perfect book without help from other people, because I might think that I'm putting things on the page, but they might just be in my head and they're not coming across. And I do a lot of critiquing myself. And I always say, I think that you think that this is what's happening, but as a reader, they don't know that and they're not seeing it. Yes. And so I need somebody who will tell me the truth, but also be kind about it. Like you said, coming from a good place, not trying to tear down your dream and make you never want to write again. Because I've heard horror stories about people who have been so cruel about somebody's project that they didn't want to write anymore. And that's really horrible and sad.
Me too. I have also, and I am a developmental editor. And so when somebody has chosen to share their work with me, even if it's a sample, to figure out if we would be a good fit, every time I chat with them, we have a quick chat in Zoom, get to know each other. And then I'm like, let me do a sample for you so you can really discern if this feels like you can take feedback from me, and I know I'm a good fit for you. And because I think that that's really important. And I remember working on a project, one of my earlier projects, and my client goes, wow, when he saw the whole manuscript come back, and he's like, I agree with like 98% of what you said. I'm like, I'm glad you disagreed with too. Because it's your story. I want it to still stay with you, even if you agreed with it, or I still feel like that disagreement that you might have is still good, because it's your story. You
Mm-hmm.
want the other person to be helping you build it, but it still should be something that you, if it doesn't resonate for whatever reason, and you've
Yes.
truly given it a fair chance, then it's okay to say, no, I don't think that doesn't feel right to do. But yeah, I totally agree with you. And I know you mentor too. You mentioned that before we started recording.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that you actually are you're into a role that actually is offering this. It's providing this type of feedback. I love that. Would you talk a bit more about it?
Sure. There was a program called Author Mentor Match, which is the first time I did that, where they would pair agented or published authors with aspiring to be published authors. And they would aspiring mentees would send in like the first 10 pages, it's almost like a query letter, the first 10 pages of their book and a synopsis and a query letter. And they would submit it to like a certain amount of the mentors that were available. And we would go through it and we would try to find the project that we thought that we could help the most. And I found somebody's who I loved the voice, I loved the writing, and I could see a vision, like it was not ready. And because that's the thing, I don't want to mentor somebody who is already ready to query. I'm happy to tell them you're ready to query. I'd love to look at your query letter and get it out there, but I want to know that I'm actually giving them something that they need. And it's just such a great experience. I had the first one, she went on to get multiple offers of representation, and then her debut sold at auction, also multiple editors. It's coming out next year. And then my second one with Smooch Pit, which is just for romance, she also had multiple offers of representation from agents and also signed a deal a couple months ago that was just announced. And it just feels so good. They're the writer, but knowing that I had a part in that and to give back to the community like that it's such a good feeling. And then to see my name in the acknowledgments and the Twitter and Instagram announcements, just it feels good. I enjoy it. I'm actually working on one now.
Yeah, very, very cool. So from your standpoint, what would you advise an aspiring author?
Well, I mean, generally, I always tell people to hold tightly to like the dream, but not necessarily a manuscript. And these aren't people that I'm mentoring. This is just when I see somebody's been querying the same manuscript for like 3 years. And sometimes you just have to say, this is not right for now. Let me see what else I can write, because sometimes the book is great, but it's not right for the market. And I do find that people sometimes hold on to things too hard. The book that got me my agent didn't sell. And that was sad. But like what I did is I pushed it aside and I started writing the next one, and that one did. As far as things that I see that people do, I think it varies. Some of them, like the pacing is off, or they're not leaning into their hook enough, and there's things that they could do, or the character development could be better. There's just so many things. As you know, as a developmental editor, every book is different.
So when you are thinking about, strengthening a character, what kind of things come up for you? Is there something in particular that kind of helps you, like that you typically suggest when you see that it's a character that needs a little something?
Well, a lot of times the character they have some issue where they won't commit to somebody else. And it's usually romance that I'm working on. They're afraid of commitment. And I'm like, why? Like, what has happened? Or they don't want to get married, which is fine, but is there a reason? Mm-hmm. Is there something in their past? Did they have issues with their parents and who had a horrible relationship and they don't want to see that again? Or, their parents are really, really hard on them and totally want them to get married and have the perfect job. And I want to know more about the parents. Why is it so important that this child gives the right image for the family? So instead of just throwing out issues that a character has, I want backstory. And I don't want too much backstory on the page, because that becomes a problem too. But you have to weave it in. People need to have what are their motivations? Like, why is this important to them?
Yeah, the context for that person,
Yeah.
just like you would with a person. When you understand the context or where that person's coming from, mm-hmm. you at least appreciate them a little bit more. Or you have a better understanding. It's the same with the character, and when you're the author, that character needs to be talking with you in some way. And so be sure to let them, be sure to let that character tell you all the things, even if you sit there and go, that doesn't make sense to me. And the character's like, yes, it does. But you just need to ask me more questions or need to let me tell you more before it clicks. Maybe the author had a vision and the character's over here going, no, that's not the way I want to go. That's not how I am, kind of thing. Just like your love triangle, where maybe there was an element of that happening, but you were able to take a step back, see it. So when that happened, when that triangle, when you started to realize that the triangle needed to pivot, needed to shift a little bit, how did you go about that? Did it feel like you needed to start over per se, or was that just the information you needed to start pivoting from where you were?
I think it was mostly pivoting from where I were, because the second character didn't get introduced until later. So it was mostly about just moving forward and what would happen. I mean, this was so long ago, it's hard to remember, but I don't believe, I mean, I'm sure I had to go back and tweak certain conversations between the two original characters just to make sure it made sense that they wouldn't work out, and maybe have like breadcrumbs and line it up, because everything also has to be consistent. Or when things change, there has to be like a clear direction, so you see how things are changing. You can't go from like A to Z without having B through X or Y there. And I find that that's another thing that a lot of authors do, is that it doesn't make, the pacing isn't right. You go from like something really small and suddenly like you're supposed to believe that two people are deeply in love when you haven't shown them growing that way.
Yes.
Or a character has this passion for this career where there was nothing at all all through the book to hint that they actually like this sort of thing.
And why? And going back to your why, like, and how important is this career? Is it because this career felt like the one place where they could shine and they just know they do well and they feel like, or everything else is falling apart around them, but here they don't? Or is it because maybe they grew up in a situation where money wasn't, available, and they looked at it like, no, I'm going to make money. I will not be in that situation again. So that's why the career is important. So understanding that nuance too is also part of shaping that character. So I love how you said that.
A 25-year-old character wasn't born at 25. They had 25 years of life, and we have to like recognize that when we're writing them, that we didn't create them. Things happened that aren't going to be on the page, but they're very important.
Oh, I love how you said that. That is awesome. That is so great that a 25-year-old character is sitting there going, hey, I had a life too, author. So that is brilliant, Meredith. I love that. So when you are mentoring your aspiring author, what kind of encouragement do you give them? And in such a way that you could encourage our listeners who might be aspiring authors themselves?
Well, I always tell them that nobody writes a perfect first draft. And everything that I'm telling them is just because I'm really committed to helping them write the best book that they can. And I think they can do it. And sometimes I tell them about my own experiences and how many beta readers I have or critique partners and how many times I've had to go back and change things, that just because something isn't perfect and I'm telling you it's not perfect doesn't mean that it's not going to get close to that. And I also remind them, like you said, that these are just my opinions. I'm only one person and it's your project, and you do not have to you could take, I say, take what you agree with and use it and toss the rest because it's your book. But I also, another thing I say is that, and I remind myself, is that there's, sometimes people don't want to make edits because they're afraid. When I get my edit letter from my editor, or even my really wonderful and kind, but also kind of cruel critique partner, because she does not hold back. For the first 24 hours, I am terrified and I am angry and I'm scared. And I'm like, I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm not going to be able to do this. How am I going to be able to do this? And then I set it aside for 24 hours and I'm like, oh, I could totally do this. But like my initial reaction is fear. So if fear is the reason why you're like, I can't do this because you don't believe that you have it in you, that's not the reason not to make the change. That it's going to take work and delay you going to query or sub or whatever it is, or to just self-publish, whatever it is, if the reason is because you don't want to take that delay, that's not a good enough reason. If, however, your gut is telling you that you don't agree with this, then that's totally different, because I don't agree with blindly following everybody's advice just because it's sometimes easier than thinking for yourself. So there's a balance between not accepting any kind of feedback or like working on it and accepting every single thing as gospel.
Yes, yes. So let's switch gears a little bit and tell me about your latest book and how that came together, like how you're taking all the things that you've learned and that you mentor when you're teaching your mentees. How did that kind of come together in your latest book?
Well, my latest book came out in July, and it's called Someone Just Like You. And it's an enemy since childhood to lovers romantic comedy. And it's about Molly and Jude, who are former neighbors and adversaries and complete opposites. They grew up across the street, and their parents were best friends, and they're both the youngest of three. And so they were kind of always shoved together because the family spent so much time together. It was always like, oh, the little ones, Molly and Jude, you play there. And they didn't get along because Molly hated that Jude was kind of a slacker, and yet everything always fell into his lap. And Jude hated that Molly was like this people pleaser goody goody and kind of just was always doing the right thing while he was getting in trouble. So they spent a lifetime, or like their early life, just fighting and pranking each other and one-upping each other. And it was pretty bad. And then they both go away to college. They have their own lives. And now they're 27 years old. And all 6 siblings from both families want to throw a surprise co-anniversary party for both sets of their parents. And they suggest that Molly and Jude be in charge of finding the destination, the venue, because they want to have it in Manhattan, and Molly and Jude live in Manhattan, and neither of them are married or have kids. So they clearly have the most time. And Molly doesn't want to do this because she knows that she's going to be stuck with Jude. But when Jude says, fine with me, of course I'll do it, unless Molly's too busy, she's like, oh no, I'm not going to be the one who doesn't do it. So she agrees. And of course, they immediately revert to their immature selves. They're pranking each other. They're 27-year-olds going on 7. But they finally put aside their animosity for the sake of their parents and their family. And they form a friendship while they're planning this party. But the friendship is like ripe with sexual tension. And this is all in Molly's POV. So she's like looking at Jude's arms, his forearms, when he's making drinks because he's a bartender, thinking, I'm not supposed to find this man attractive. I'm not supposed to like watching his hands. He's like the demon person. Like, this is so bad, but it is what it is. And she has these feelings for him. She's dating somebody casually. He's dating somebody casually. They both bring that date to the party and realize that it's each other's doppelganger. Something that it comes out that they've both been dating a version of each other's doppelganger since they started dating in high school, and everybody noticed it except them. And so they have to it raises the question, why are we seeking in romantic partners what we claim to hate about each other? And so then that's obviously they get together, but it was a fun book that was inspired by my family and the family across the street when I was growing up, because we spent all this time with them, and I was the youngest, and I became best friends with the youngest. And I said, what if Ronnie was a boy? And instead of being best friends, we hated each other. And then we fell in love later. So it was really nostalgic for me to go back and write this like dual family kind of book. It's very lighthearted, although there's depth in there, but it's just a fun read. It's a real romantic comedy because there is comedy in it. People say that a lot of rom-coms these days don't really have that much
Right.
And I've been told that like my book really does. So I think it's funny. Not everybody shares my sense of humor. It's a little off the wall. And it's, from the premise itself, you can tell that it's a little kooky, but I like that, So I think that it's an enjoyable read, and I hope that people who read it feel that way too. But I would say that I've written so many now, and I've helped other people, and I've critiqued so much that I have certainly gotten better at pacing and seeing what needs to be done in a book. But even now, I still rely on other people. I could write I could help like 20 people get agents and editor offers. And it doesn't mean that I could write the perfect book, or it doesn't mean that my books are like amazing. They're not. I mean, I think they are, but a lot, it's just people have different opinions on things. So I would say that I still rely on other people just the way other people rely on me.
I love that. I love that. And as you were describing the story, you really could hear the backstory happening. So just by how you described it, you were showing, helping listeners to understand, here's a lot of what's going into these characters. And all of those elements are going to be coming through this book in various ways to help demonstrate the relationships, the things that were growing, how they were growing up and what was happening to create the tension as children, to create the personalities, to show what they were doing. So when they revert, you do understand where that's coming from, and you can see them working through that, because that reverting also helped them to shift for themselves from, well, maybe we can be friends. Maybe we are, maybe it's a different way we're friends now, actually. So you were the way you described all that really helped to show all the things we were talking about with characters.
Good.
I love that.
I mean, there's no flashbacks in the book. It all takes place in the present, but I weaved in their backstory, because the backstory really was the reason. And there are people that have complained in reviews, and I don't read my reviews, but every once in a while I'll get tagged in one, or every once in a while you just see one that isn't great, and where people say that they're so immature. And I was like, but they did not meet at 27 as like 27-year-old Molly and 27-year-old Jude. They met when they were born. And just like when I hang out with my sisters, we're all in our 50s. And we act like we're back at home at the dinner table when we were kids. I'm still the baby. And it's just because that's how we know each other. I take care of myself. I pay my bills, but as soon as I'm with my family, I'm the baby again. And it was almost like that for Molly and Jude. They get back into, they kind of forgot for a while that they're professional, grown-ups, and approaching 30.
But that really shows an understanding of the character. And it also says that, I think that that's actually what you were doing, was showing the depth for the characters by doing that. But I love that you did that. And I also like the fact that you just mentioned about the reviews, that yes, you may get reviews, and whether you choose to look at them or not, do what is right by you. And, when you see some that, hey, I don't like the fact that they're carrying on, like 27-year-olds wouldn't do this. Well, but do you understand? Did you see all those piece parts coming in? It's okay if you didn't, but you'll see also reviews that come in going, oh my gosh, I totally get it. I totally see that. And those are also where those readers are that you're like, yes, those are my dreamies. Those are my like ideal readers. And and that's a great feeling too. So seriously, I love all of that. I love that how you described it. I love how you help people, and how you also referred, just like you said, coming back to, even when you're writing on pieces now, you're still following the same principles that you followed all along and teach. So, so that is so awesome. Meredith, where can people connect with you? Where can they get your books?
Well, my books can be bought anywhere that books are sold. Barnes and Noble and indie bookstores and Amazon. And I have the trade paperback, the Kindle or the Nook or wherever e-format you use, and audio anywhere. And you can find me on Instagram under Meredith Schorr. I'm also there on Threads, same profile. I'm still on Twitter/X under Meredith Schorr as well, but much more limited these days. And my website is www.meredithschorr.com.
And how do you spell Schorr?
Schorr.
Awesome. Meredith, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.